Yeah, you know what time it is. Okay. Neil Ratner Rat Doc here with a story. Now, yesterday would have been my old friend Johnny Winter's 75th birthday. Now, unfortunately, Johnny died in 2014 from the effects of emphysema. And today I thought I would tell you a few things about Johnny that you might not know. All right. But as usual, a little background first. Okay. So both Johnny and his brother Edgar were encouraged musically from an early age, since their father was also a musician who played saxophone and guitar and sang at churches, weddings, and all kinds of local events. Now, as a result, the Winter brothers began performing at an early age, even appearing on a local children's TV show with Johnny playing the ukulele. But it was actually a movie Johnny saw when he was 12 years old that convinced him to be a musician. The movie was a period mob piece called Pete Kelly's Blues. And according to Winter, I remember that movie making me want to be a musician. It was a real bluesy music with songs I could relate to. A lot of songs I had grown up singing. I didn't like Pete Kelly's part so much. The shooting part of the movie didn't appeal to me. It was the music that got me. All right. So Johnny started to make a name for himself around Texas and the Louisiana blues scene. And one night, he and Edgar went to a local club in their hometown of Beaumont, a rough and tumble oil town, mind you, to see B.B. King. Now, Johnny already had chops and wanted to play with B.B. According to Johnny, I was about 17, and B.B. didn't want to let me on stage at first. He asked me for a union card, and I had one. Also, I kept sending people over to ask him to let me play. Finally, he decided that there were enough people who wanted to hear me that no matter if I was good or not, it would be worth it to let me on stage. He gave me his guitar and let me play. I got a standing ovation, and he took his guitar back. So that was the start. Johnny with one of his blues legends, B.B. King at 17 years old. Now, Steve Paul was a New Yorker and the owner of the iconic club in New York City called The Scene. And he was the one who sort of decided that he would manage Johnny. And he famously created a bidding war for Johnny's first record deal, which was ultimately won by Columbia's Clive Davis, when in 1968, Clive gave Johnny a $600,000 advance. Imagine that. $600,000 in 1968. And that smashed the previous record of $200,000 that Ahmet Ertegun, president of Atlantic Records, had given to Led Zeppelin just a year before. Now, I met Johnny through Rick Derringer. Rick and I had been neighbors in New York City in the summer of '69, and Rick had just started to play in Johnny's band. Now, when I went back to college after the summer, my friends and I decided to promote a concert, and I thought I could convince Rick and Johnny to do it. So I want to read from my newly released book, Rock Doc, What Happened Next. Okay, so our first question was who to book. I wondered if I could persuade Rick to do our first gig. He was playing in Johnny Winter's band, which was still doing theater-sized shows. Rick was comfortable with the idea, but he thought the band's manager, Steve, would argue that playing at an unknown venue in a market that no one cared about would be a lost opportunity. I tried to sweeten the deal, assuring Rick that they would get most of the money and we would party hardy and supply whatever the band needed. Now, the band had a gig not far from the University of Vermont. That's where I was going to school a few weeks later. And Rick invited me there and said we could talk more. The show was my first time seeing Rick and Johnny on stage together. It was an incredible pairing. They traded guitar licks in a unique and incredibly dynamic way. After the show, we partied until the wee hours and had such a good time that as I was leaving, I jokingly said that they should come back to Burlington with me. Moments later in the hotel lobby, Teddy Slatus, their road manager, confronted me. He looked upset, but I couldn't imagine what I had done wrong. Neil, "We have a problem. Rick and Johnny want to go with you." He must be joking, I thought, but the look on his face told me otherwise. "I have to get back to the city," he continued, "and I'm not going to leave them on their own." Rick wandered into the lobby and came over to see what was going on. He insisted I would be the perfect person to look after them. Teddy was still unhappy and called Johnny on the house phone. When Johnny enthusiastically endorsed the idea, he had no choice but to agree. I became the babysitter for the weekend. I booked rooms at the Holiday Inn close to UVM, and the next day gave them a tour of the university in the area. That night, Johnny and Rick wanted to go out, and I suggested a club where some friends were playing. When we walked in, the room got silent. The crowd was dumbstruck. By the end of the night, Johnny and Rick were jamming with the band. Word spread quickly, and the club filled to capacity, while a large crowd spilled onto the street. It was light outside by the time we left. I dropped the guys back at the hotel, and they flew back to the city on Sunday. Rick and Johnny said it was one of the best weekends they had spent in years. So that was sort of my first experience with Johnny, and as you can imagine, I got really close to Johnny that weekend. And then about 6 months later, I was hired to be the road manager for Johnny's brother Edgar and his new band White Trash. Since I had no experience as a road manager, I went out with Johnny first for a couple of weeks to get my feet wet. During that period of time, I had the incredible experience also of being a fly on the wall when Steve Paul brought me with him to renegotiate Johnny's deal with Clive Davis at Columbia. Again, indulge me one more time, a little reading from my book, Rock Doc. So meanwhile, Steve Paul and I were getting on well. I was a quick learner, and in addition, I think he saw my business potential. He took me along to important business meetings, including one renegotiating Johnny's record deal with Columbia's Clive Davis. This was my first time in a meeting with a record company president. Even though I was an observer, I felt like I had taken an important step forward. Steve walked in like he owned the place. He introduced me as Edgar's new road manager. Clive was gracious. He told me he thought Edgar was fantastic and that he was on his way to becoming a big star. During the negotiations, Steve and Clive threw numbers back and forth, each justifying why they were right. Clive wasn't going to let Johnny Winter walk away, and I'm sure he knew the meeting was going to cost him more money. It was just a matter of how much. I realized that most of what was going on was posturing and attitude. The meeting was like a poker game, and it was a good lesson for me on negotiating and doing business. All right. Yeah. Now, I could go on for a long time. But I'll leave you today with one more important and interesting fact about Johnny. By the late 70s, not too many people cared about Muddy Waters, one of Johnny's heroes. But Johnny did. And when he heard Muddy couldn't get a deal, he convinced Steve Paul to put him out on their Blue Sky label. The ensuing album, Hard Again, was a critical and commercial hit. I think it won a Grammy. And Johnny would work with Waters on 2 studio follow-ups, which also won Grammys, and a live album. The pair grew so close that Winters was one of only a few people to appear at Waters' wedding to Marva Jean Brooks. And near the end of his life, Muddy would grow to think of Johnny as a son. All right. That's my story for today. I hope you enjoy it. Johnny Winter. Johnny, I miss you. I'm so glad we have your music to listen to. And that's it. Okay, Neil Ratner Rock Doc out for now. I'll be back sometime this week with another story. Again, my book, Rock Doc, it's available on Amazon in all formats. The audiobook is kind of fun because I read it and I do all the voices. Or if you want an autographed copy, www.neilratnerrockdoc.com. On the far left, buy the book. Let me know how you would like me to endorse it, and I will do that for you. All right, that's it for today. Neil Ratner Rock Doc out for now. Have a great rest of the weekend. Bye.